So what is the alternative to testing? And, what are better ways to measure whether the schools are truly serving students well?
Right. So testing in and of itself isn't necessarily the problem. It's how tests get used. So the state house passed a bill this last session, House Bill 4, and it was a fairly comprehensive rewrite of the state's accountability system. And it moved away from a single summative end-of-year test to doing 3 short cycle tests, a beginning of year, a middle of year, and an end of year test. And the idea was that these tests would be used to provide baseline information to teachers to enable them to guide instruction. When a teacher thinks about assessment, they think about it in 2 ways. A summative assessment and a formative assessment. So a formative assessment is, okay, like, you're new to my class. I don't know you. I've kind of looked through your record, but like, I'm going to give you a basic test and see how you do and see what you know. And I'm also going to try to figure out, is there stuff you don't know that I'm going to need to teach you? And then at the end of the year, you give a final exam, a summative exam. You try to highlight all the different important things you covered. And it's a way of asking, did the student master the basic material? In Texas, we are using a test that is not valid and reliable to do things like force schools to close, force school districts to move teachers and administrators away from those schools, allow
reconsolidation, right?
Or reconstitution, allow school districts to be taken over by the education commissioner, who is not qualified to run schools and school districts. Like
what's happened in Houston, for example.
In Houston and in Fort Worth.
And I saw that the results of that is that Houston ISD, well, not direct result, but maybe in part, that Houston ISD lost like 800 teachers over the past year and a half or something like this, right?
There was a big exodus of teachers out of because TEA handed it off to Mike Miles, the old superintendent from Dallas, who now runs a chain of charter schools and, thinks that it's better to have a discipline unit than a library, apparently, in schools. And, the other thing is this, like, when I started to teach, there were state standardized tests, and you gave the test, the scores got reported, the public could see them, the parents could see them. But that was it. Test transparency. Then No Child Left Behind came along, and all of a sudden there were all these sanctions tied to assessment. And so the stakes got jacked up. And there's a whole body of research around what happens when you stop measuring broadly and you just measure narrowly, right? Like all these apocryphal stories, like in the Soviet Union, there was a factory and they got rewarded based on how many tons of nails they made. So they made really big, heavy nails. And then there was a shoe factory and they got assessed on how many pairs of shoes they could produce. So they produced all these really small shoes. And so if you're only looking at one outcome, then it starts to warp the system. Austin, way back in the day, in the late 90s, was the whole school district got indicted because there was an associate superintendent who hired some bean counter from TEA who knew a way to jigger the numbers such that if you had a school that was right on the line between passing and not passing, he knew a trick to push it over the edge. It had to do with unique ID numbers and social security numbers, and they got caught.
Right.
And I don't think anybody went to jail, but people definitely got fired. And this happened around the country when people's careers were based on one day, one assessment, and it doesn't work.